evening. My name is Richard Wexler, and this is Caring in America, the podcast for caregivers and care recipients. We have a special guest this morning. I'm going to introduce her via her bio. Cameron Huddleston is an award-winning personal finance journalist and author of Mom and Dad, We Need to Talk: How to Have Essential Conversations with Your Parents About Their Finances. She was a caregiver for more than 12 years for her mom, who had Alzheimer's, and is currently the Director of Education and Content at Careful, the first service built to organize and protect aging adults' daily finances. Cameron, are you there, ma'am?
I am here.
Welcome. Where am I talking to? Where are you sitting this morning?
I am sitting in my home office in Kentucky.
In Kentucky?
Yes.
How's the weather in Kentucky in early December?
We've actually had some snow, which is a little bit unusual for us. It's not usually warm this time of year, but usually we don't get snow. So.
And here we go. Starting off, we've had a little bit of a mixture here, but I wouldn't call it real snow yet. It's probably coming. But great subject this morning, talking about aging adults, talking about their adult children, talking about finances. So why is it important for adult children to talk with their parents about the parents' finances?
Well, I think that you and I are perfect examples of why, because we both unexpectedly found ourselves in the role of caregiver. And caregiving can be expensive both for the person who is providing the care and for the person who is receiving the care. Because if you need care and your family members cannot provide full-time care for you, it can be incredibly expensive. And most people really don't have a plan for this. They don't have a plan for long-term care. They think, well, it's not going to happen to me, but there's a good chance it will. There's a good chance that your parents are going to need long-term care at some point, because research has found that those who are 65 and older, half of those people, more than half, will need some sort of long-term care. And it can cost, we're talking $5,000-$6,000 a month on average for home health care or assisted living. If you need skilled nursing, it's twice as much. And that's just the average. If you are in a place where the cost of living is higher, it's going to cost a lot more. Now, not everyone is going to need care, but most of us are going to have to get involved in our parents' finances at some point. If they don't need care, they're going to die. It's a fact of life. Everyone dies. And so you're going to get involved with your parents' finances and dealing with what is left behind. And if you don't know what is there, if there's not something in writing, if there's not a will or a trust, then it's going to be incredibly difficult for you at a time when you are dealing with the loss of a parent. And it just makes that difficult situation that much harder. And so that's why I think it's so important to have conversations with your parents about their finances, to get an idea of what sort of estate planning documents they have. Do they have a plan for long-term care? Where do they stand financially? How are things going? Getting this information before you have to get involved is going to help you have a plan to deal with those emergencies that will arise.
You know, this is golden information, folks that are listening to this. As Cameron's talking about she wound up in this situation, my family wound up in this situation. We talk about It's really hard emotionally and physically when an older loved one needs care. And most people aren't going to get four like I did, and most people aren't going to have a 14-year journey like I did. But the other piece of that, it's so hard financially. We talk about this little tiny word care, and we talk about this little tiny word cost. Before I ask you another question, I'm older than you are, and the generation that I came from, it was really common where no information passed between the children and mom and dad, the adults. There was almost like this brick wall. You would never go and ask dad about his finances. The generation I came from, mom usually didn't work. She was home. So you would never go to dad and ask, okay, so dad, what the house cost? What's the mortgage? How are we doing? I mean, those conversations really never took place. But times have changed, and are the parents' finances really any of the kids' business these days?
It's That's a great question because I think a lot of older adults might think, no, my finances are not my kids' business. And I get it 100% because my parents were part of the silent generation. And that that name for that generation is so accurate because they certainly didn't want to talk about money. My dad more so than my mom. My dad truly considered money to be a taboo topic. My sister and I were raised to believe that you don't talk about money. It's impolite. So of course, he didn't share details about his finances. My mother was more forthcoming. And I do remember after my parents got divorced and I was in college when this happened, my mother told me, you need to ask your dad what his final wishes are. Like what does he want? Because he'll always joke if you ask him, what do you want? Sharpen my toes and hammer me into the ground. And the thing
Whoa.
is, I know it. I
I've
know
never,
it. You
in
never
all the
heard that.
people I've talked to, I've never heard that one before. Wow. Go ahead.
so so apparently that was like my dad's line. If someone were to ask him or if my mom tried to ask him when they were married. And the thing is, I was in my early 20s when I had that conversation with my mom and I thought, well, I don't need to have this conversation with my dad now. And I didn't. My dad died at 61. I was 28. And guess what? It gets better. He was in a second marriage. He didn't have a will and he was an attorney, so he should have known better.
Wow.
And I can't help but think maybe if I had, I don't know, had the nerve or just even like maybe if I just even thought to ask him, like my mom suggested that I do, ask him, Dad, what do you have a will? What are your plans? What are your wishes? What are your wishes so that we can honor them? If I had asked that question, maybe he would have been prompted to say, yeah, I think I need to put this in writing. I'm an attorney. This is what I tell my clients to do all the time. But he didn't. And then, of course, because he's in a second marriage, it made things awkward. It could have been a lot worse because my family got along. But if you don't have family members who get along, or of course, if there's a lot of money involved, people get greedy really fast and there can be a lot of fighting. And so I think a lot of times people don't want to think about their own mortality. They don't think that their kids need to know about their finances. But if you approach it from a place of love and compassion, telling your parents, look, you worked hard all your life to save money, to have a secure retirement, to take care of us when we were growing up. And I want to be able to repay that generosity that you showed us, me, my siblings. And to do that, I need some information. I want to be able to honor your wishes, but I need to know those wishes. If
Sure.
something happens and for whatever reason you're not able to manage your finances on your own because of a health issue, anything, I need to know how you would like your finances managed. I don't want to make a mistake with your money. And I think the point that you're trying to make is, I want to honor your wishes, and I don't want to take away control from you. In fact, I'm trying to give you control. I want you to tell me exactly what you want so that I can follow through on those wishes.
And that's fantastic, excellent advice. And I talk to people. I'm not an expert in the financial industry like you are, but I talk to people about this subject matter all the time, and we talk about consequences, and you've kind of talked about that a little bit. But I mean, if you don't have this conversation, what potential consequences are out there? Maybe for the older loved ones, maybe for the adult children. Could you talk about that?
Sure. So let me give you a good example from my book. I interviewed a man named Doug Nordman, and his father lived in Colorado. Doug was in Hawaii. And while Doug was visiting his dad once, he noticed that there were perhaps some potential early warning signs of memory loss, not enough to really scare him. But he did say something to his father about, Dad, have you named a power of attorney? Have you named someone to make financial decisions for you if you can't? And his dad pretty much just brushed him off. No, 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 whatever. Don't worry about it. No, you don't need to worry about that. Well, Doug told me he wished he had pushed his father on that. No, Dad, let's talk about this. He should have insisted that his dad make sure that document was in place, because then, not too long after that, he gets a call. It's the middle of the night. His dad's in the emergency room. He has a bleeding ulcer, and he has to fly from Hawaii to Colorado. His dad, he does have dementia at this point. It has progressed, and they want to, after this surgery, move him into rehabilitation at a nursing home. And the bills are coming in. Doug can't pay the bills because Doug was never named his dad's power of attorney.
Wow.
And so Doug ends up spending 9 months and more than $10,000 going through the legal process, the court process, to be named his dad's conservator. And then he has to go through background checks. It's quite the process. And the process of being named someone's conservator, you're essentially putting your loved one on trial to prove that you're no longer competent. You've got to get doctors there to testify. It's really a horrible situation for families. And then once you're named conservator, then you're filing an annual report with the court, how you manage your loved one's finances. If his father had simply named him power of attorney, there wouldn't have been that $10,000 cost. Doug would not have given up 9 months of his life trying to be named his dad's conservator. He also wouldn't have had to file annual reports with the court with how he was managing his dad's finances. As power of attorney, you don't have to file reports with anyone. Of course, you have a fiduciary responsibility to manage that person's finances in their best interest, but this could be avoided by having these conversations, making sure your parents have essential legal documents in place to name someone they trust to make financial decisions for them if they can't, to name a healthcare proxy to make medical decisions for them, to make sure they have that will and or that trust that spells out who gets what when they die, because if they don't, state law determines who gets your assets. And you also need an advance directive or what's called a living will that spells out what sort of end of life medical treatment you do or do not want, so that your family doesn't have to decide whether to keep you on life support. They know what your wishes are. And these conversations also allow you to have plans. Like when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, we quickly scrambled to update her legal documents. She was still competent enough to sign them. She was in the very, very early stage. But I found myself having to play detective to get the information I needed about her finances. And that wasn't fun, digging through her stuff because she was already forgetting things. And we did not have a conversation about what sort of care she wanted before she needed that care, before she was already experiencing cognitive decline. So again, I was making a lot of decisions for her, and I hated being in that position. And I could have avoided that if I had simply talked to her before there were any memory issues to figure out what her wishes were and how we would pay for care, making sure all those documents were updated. again, before there was an emergency.
This is again amazing advice, folks. We're almost 17 minutes into this conversation. I'm going to bring up that four-letter word that I know you guys hate called plan. And what Cameron's talking about, it's so important. I mean, little simple things that aren't simple and they're really bad when a parent, when something happens to them from a mental perspective, they get Alzheimer's, they get dementia, maybe they have a bad fall. The conversation you thought you'd have someday as she's talking about their finances and care and what they want and where they want to live and who they want taking care of them and all these questions that are really important, and all of a sudden you can't have that conversation because for all these different reasons they can't respond correctly. So it is so important. I bring this up on every conversation we have to plan and really try to get the people that are listening and who you share this episode with, and please do, to really understand how important that is. Cameron, not all of us, but a lot of us have brothers and sisters. Should should the brothers and sisters be involved in the conversations as well?
Yes, they should. And I usually suggest that people talk with their siblings before talking to their parents so that all of you can get on the same page. You can decide who's going to initiate the conversation. Is it one of you or all of you? When are you going to have the conversation? And please don't do it during the middle of a holiday meal, even though everyone might be there together at the table. There might be other people who don't need to be part of the conversation. So don't do it during a holiday meal. And you and your siblings can also have a conversation about what role each of you is willing to play in your parents' financial lives, in providing care if they need care. Kind of come to an agreement before. Now, if you do have a sibling who's going to sabotage the conversation in any way, and I'm not talking about a sibling that you just don't necessarily get along with. I'm talking about someone, perhaps they have their own mental health issues, they have some sort of criminal history, they have substance abuse issues that would make it difficult to have a calm conversation with them. I say in those situations, it's okay. Use your best judgment if you think that they should not be involved. But other siblings, put aside your past grievances, come together, have this conversation so that you can go to mom and dad as a united group so that they don't see that you're fighting about this, that you're united in your wishes to help out mom and dad.
Wow. And wow. I mean, I say wow a lot. Great information. You talk about don't have this conversation during a holiday dinner. Is there a good time, a better time to have this conversation with your parents?
Certainly, you want to do it at a time when you don't have to rush, when there's not the additional stress of the holidays. So let's say you and your siblings only come together during the holidays. What you could do is use that opportunity to let your parents know that you want to have a conversation at some point and let them decide on the time. Mom and dad, when would be a good time for you to sit down and talk with us? We just want to have a conversation to get some information. Put the ball in their court. But don't let them back out. Oh no, we don't have this. No, let's do it. Let's put a time on the calendar now. Put it in writing so that they can't, worm their way out of it. And so then, and maybe it's not in person. If you can do it in person, that's great, but maybe it's over a FaceTime or, a phone call if you have to. And people need to realize this is not just one conversation. This is a series of conversations. And certainly if you have a parent who's starting to show some signs of cognitive decline, better to have the conversation in the morning when they're going to be more alert. Don't wait until the end of the day. That's something you need to keep in mind too. Certainly, if you have a parent who is living on their own and perhaps the other parent has passed away or they're divorced and there is that cognitive decline, that's the one instance where you've got to get involved right away. Like you cannot let any more time go by without starting to really get involved with their finances, because otherwise they're going to be making mistakes. They're at risk of fraud and exploitation, and you don't want that to happen.
Again, some fantastic advice. A lot of the questions I get, whether I'm speaking to someone online or whether I've done a lot of public events like you have, and people ask me, okay, I get this idea of this conversation. Do you have any examples of the best way to start the conversation with your loved ones?
Sure, there are a variety of ways you can do it. So if you're still relatively young and you're listening to this, and by relatively young I mean 20s, 30s, maybe even early 40s, you can get away with going to your parents and asking for advice because that avoids the role reversal. Something like, hey, mom and dad, now that I have kids and I'm married, should I have life insurance? And their response is going to give you clues to what sort of planning they've done. They might say, yes, of course you need life insurance. Or they might say, yeah, I don't know. I never bothered with it. And then you keep asking more questions, or you ask them, hey, do I need a will? Or ask them about saving for retirement. Another thing that you can do is share a story. This works great if you are in midlife, in your 40s, in your 50s, because I can guarantee that you know someone who's already had to get involved with their parents' finances or care. And so you can share a cautionary tale about something that went wrong with someone you know because they didn't have these conversations, or something that went right. Perhaps a friend whose parent passed away and they had had these conversations. The parent had all the estate planning documents in place, and it made a difficult time easier because there was a plan. And so stories are a great way to start these conversations. You can talk about your own financial or estate planning experience. If you just happen to have a will, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney drafted, you could let your parents know that you've got these documents and where they're located. And oh, by the way, mom and dad, where are your estate planning documents? I need to know in case there's an emergency. It's not going to do anyone any good if we don't know where these documents are. So there are a couple of different ways that you can have the conversation naturally.
And again, that's fantastic advice because that's a question that I get all the time, and a lot. And I don't know what percentage of people want to have this conversation. I wish it was 100% of people that have older loved ones, parents, grandparents, etc. But that's great advice on how to start the conversation. So let's say the adult children want to have it. How much detail? How do they need to go in depth about their parents' finances? What do they really need to know?
The more information you can get, the better. Of course, that's going to depend on how willing your parents are to share the details of their finances. At the least, you do need to find out, do they have those essential estate planning documents? A will or a trust, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, and that advanced directive or living will. If they don't have these documents, you need to encourage them to get those documents right away and to tell you where they are. Then, if you can find out some basic information about how they pay their bills and what sources of income they have. Are they relying only on Social Security? Do they have a pension? Do they have retirement savings? How are they doing in general in retirement? Are they getting by okay, or are they struggling to get by? Because if they're struggling to get by, then they might start asking for support from you, and you need to know this because that's going to impact your finances. But the reason I say is you need to know about their bills is this is for emergency planning. If mom or dad were to end up in the hospital and they were there for a little while, you want to know, are they paying the bills by check or are they set up to be paid automatically? Someone's got to be covering those bills if they are not writing the checks. And you can simply let your parents know, hey, if something were to happen, I'd like to know how you pay your bills so we can make sure they get paid so that the lights stay on at your house. It's as simple as that. I had a friend who did that, and her mom said, you know what? I'm so glad you asked that because I never thought about that. Went home and made a list of all of her bills and told her daughter how she paid them. One thing that you can do is, if they're reluctant to share some of these details, is to simply ask them to write this information down. Make a list of your assets, make a list of your accounts, your usernames and your passwords if you have online accounts. Tell me where the lockbox key is. Tell me who the financial and legal professionals you work with are. Put this all in writing. Tell me how to access it and under what circumstances I can access it. And this is going to allow them to maintain control. They might not want to tell you this information, but they might be okay with writing it down so that you have this information in case of an emergency.
Now, again, folks, this is fantastic information that Cameron's been giving out, and I really hope you're listening and really hope you pass this on to other folks in your life. As we get ready to wrap this up, I do kind of have a final question. So, what happens? You go to your parents, you go to the grandparents, whomever you're trying to speak with, and they just don't want to talk.
Don't give up.
Great advice.
Seriously, sometimes it can take several attempts to get your older loved one to start feeling comfortable sharing information with you. I have a friend, she's actually a financial advisor. It took her years to get her mom to even admit that she had estate planning documents, but she didn't give up. She kept trying. Try different approaches. Now, if you've tried several approaches, you've been at it for a few years now and they're unwilling to talk, again, ask them to write the information down. You could get a third party involved. Maybe that means reaching out to a family friend, someone at their place of worship, an unbiased third party. If they have a financial advisor, you could reach out to the financial advisor and ask him or her to encourage your parents to share some information with you. Maybe it's even reaching out to their family doctor and asking their doctor to start, to say something about, hey, do you have a plan for long-term care? Do your kids know what your plan is? Getting that third party involved can sometimes do the trick.
I totally agree. And just a lot of fantastic information, folks. I mean, this is so important. Again, when we started talking about these little tiny words, cost and care, care is going to happen to most of us. Some of us may be lucky and it may be a few hours. Others, it may be years. And we know it's really expensive, and I don't foresee that changing in the near future. It's probably only going to get more expensive. So really understanding what your parents have done, what they have, what they don't have. Do you folks, as the adult children, need to contribute? We're seeing that more and more. Do your siblings need to contribute? These conversations are so important. As we do get ready to wrap up, Cameron, is there contact information you would like to give out if people want to connect with you?
Sure. The best way to connect with me is to go to my website, which is CameronHuddleston.com.
Perfect. That is fantastic. And as always, folks, if you want to connect with me, you'd like to be a guest, have a conversation on the podcast, you have comments, you have questions, the email, once again, eldered2023@gmail.com. So as I say on every episode, folks, until we meet again, have yourself an awesome day.